How far is too far? This question is far too subjective and it can probably never be answered, but today we're coming at you with 7 moments in television that definitely towed the line. From raunchy scenes to political discussion and even a series that incited actual crime. This should be a good video, so for all this and more, stay tuned right here at Wonderlane. What's your favorite TV show? Are you more akin to wholesome family entertainment, or do you like your TV shows a little edgier? Let us know in the comments. The first series on our list is The Simpsons, arguably one of the most ingenious animated series of all time, and with 30 years of production now, it's one of the longest aired shows of all time. Even though The Simpsons has been the source of many scandals and controversies, it is known for its more subtle references and subliminal humor, unlike South Park or Family Guy. In one episode, however, The Simpsons writers decided not to beat around the bush, and some say they went too far with it. We're talking about the episode It's All Lisa's Fault from season 13. In this episode, the Simpsons take a family trip to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where the whole family faces some notable hardship. Homer was kidnapped by a cab driver, robbed by delinquents in the street, there was a monkey attack, and a couple other little mishaps. So the country of Brazil was painted in a very negative light, and when Fernando Cardoso, the Brazilian president at the time, saw the episode, he took offense. He criticized the writers publicly and even went as far as to pursue legal action. He saw this as potentially detrimental to Brazil's tourism industry, which had just received an influx of several $1 million for an advertising campaign. Due to the fact that artistic freedom is a thing, his claim ultimately did not succeed. But the creators nevertheless apologized for the one-sided portrayal of Brazil, explaining that it primarily had a comedic purpose, and that they assumed that the viewers of the series would be able to distinguish comedic exaggeration from reality. Let's move on to the Netflix series Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, which is about a woman who, after 15 years of being in a cult, breaks out of her old life and tries to find her footing in New York City. Even though the character of Kimmy Schmidt is a real ray of sunshine, the series also has some seriously dark facets. For example, in Season 1, Episode 4, titled Kimmy Goes to the Doctor, the role of plastic surgeon Dr. Sidney Grant was introduced. Played by Martin Short, the quaint plastic surgeon had the misfortune of not being able to control his face due to all of his beauty operations. So his fairly grotesque face is constantly morphing. The character had uncanny parallels to the prominent plastic surgeon Dr. Frederick Brandt, who suffered from severe depression in 2015. Shortly after the release of the aforementioned episode, Dr. Brandt was found dead in his house in Miami. He had taken his own life. Press spokesman for the family explained that he had suffered from severe depression even before the cartoonish portrayal of him in Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, but that his portrayal had in fact taken a toll on him. Even though Brandt's spokesperson ultimately said that the series was not the reason for his suicide, he did make it clear that the parody was inappropriate and went too far, especially since Brandt was already suffering psychologically. Moving on, let's take a look at a series that didn't just have one controversial episode, but instead was controversial as a whole. Dexter is about a police officer and forensic scientist, Dexter Morgan, who uses his professional knowledge to commit and get away with a series of brutal crimes. The basic concept of the series subliminally provides tips for real criminals, as it shows insight into police practice as well as actual crime. Despite the fact that Dexter was initially very positively received by critics and fans alike, and still enjoys a great deal of popularity, it ultimately had some negative consequences. Since the release of the first season, there have been a total of 3 serious criminal cases tied to the show, including murder cases. For example, in January of 2014, a 21-year-old man from Leicester in the United Kingdom was convicted of murder. In his hearing, he referenced Dexter, among other things. A few years earlier, there was a similar case in which Canadian filmmaker Mark Twitchell was convicted of impersonating Dexter Morgan on social media. Even more extreme, however, was the case of Jessica Lopez, who copied a murder from the series verbatim, and she was sentenced to life in prison. Dexter was a very successful series from an artistic and cinematic standpoint, but its controversial nature crossed the boundaries of reason to such an extent that it had more negative than positive effects, and the show had to be canceled after the 3rd case. A series that definitely cannot be left out of a discussion about TV shows going too far or crossing a proverbial line is Game of Thrones. The series is known as one of the most elaborate and high-quality television series of all time, but it's also notorious for its shameless depictions of violence, intrigue, and sexuality. There are countless eyebrow-raising moments throughout the series, but there is one scene in particular that stood out in this regard. We're talking about the wedding aftermath scene in the 6th episode of Season 5. After Ramsay Bolton and Sansa Stark are married in the episode, the scene depicts Bolton forcing himself on Stark. Even though the scene doesn't show explicit details, it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for many fans. On one hand, this was due to the fact that in the course of the 4th and 5th season, the scenes with sexual violence had become more and more frequent. On the other hand, the scene between Ramsay Bolton and Sansa Stark, unlike other similar scenes, was not included in the original book. So the writers of the series wrote it into the script by their own volition. Therefore, this scene could not be justified by the fact that it also appeared in the original book. Many viewers and critics complained that the rape scene was superfluous and cheap, also because it was of little importance for the plot as a whole. The next series on our list is Family Guy. One of the most popular animated series of all time, Family Guy is known for being really funny, but also being really offensive. And oftentimes it seems like Seth MacFarlane doesn't care what anyone thinks. Some fans respect him and the show more for this, but some have become very upset. A prime example of this kind of stressing of social norms would be the character of Glenn Quagmire. The entire basis of the character revolves around sexual assault. He's basically a walking sex crime. And therefore, throughout the course of the show, there have been dozens of instances in which Quagmire acts inappropriately towards women and even children. Definitely not a respectable gentleman. He's one of the most promiscuous characters ever written into existence, and he has definitely been the main culprit for any criticism to come towards Family Guy. Basically, people have gotten upset because they feel like the character makes light of some serious issues that our society does deal with. In one scene, however, the writers of Family Guy definitely went too far. Quagmire finds an underage girl tied up and gagged in a public restroom. Instead of helping her, we cut to a diary entry that reads, "Dear Diary, jackpot." Family Guy was heavily criticized for all the jokes about trafficking and sexual assault via Quagmire, and the character has become much more mild as a result. There's something to be said for not being overly sensitive and knowing how to take a joke, but there is such a thing as going too far. Now let's take a look at 2.5 Men, one of the most famous sitcoms of the 21st century, which owed a large portion of its success to lead actor Charlie Sheen. Since the series kind of revolves around the wild bachelor Charlie Harper, it's no wonder that the series boasts a handful of offensive moments, from love triangles to affairs with the daughters and siblings of his muses, all the way to banging Jake's teacher. He was definitely very out there. The moment when 2.5 Men allegedly went too far, however, has relatively little to do with the escapades of Charlie Harper's character, and instead with a real-life story that took place in the background of the series. In 2012, Charlie Sheen was fired from the show and replaced by Ashton Kutcher. The reason for this was Charlie Sheen's private escapades. For months, he was almost constantly intoxicated, partied constantly, and was just not fit for work on location. He also began to insult his colleagues and eventually his boss, Chuck Lorre. After Sheen was replaced by Kutcher, the series came to an end after the 12th season. However, in the very last episode, the producer of the series, Chuck Lorre, threw a bit of a jab at Charlie Sheen. The last shot of the series shows the front door of Charlie's former house. Then, a Charlie Sheen lookalike enters the frame and rings the doorbell. And then, the Charlie Sheen lookalike is crushed by a giant piano. The camera then zooms out to reveal Chuck Lorre, who looks into the camera and says, "Winning." Many fans, but also TV critics, found this action by Chuck to be inappropriate and hostile, and they criticized that level of personal hostility in a popular TV show. Charlie Sheen also expressed his concern, and Chuck Lorre apologized for the final scene. The last show on this list is the legendary sitcom Seinfeld. In the 90s, Seinfeld was considered to be the most successful sitcom in the world. It was also voted the second best written TV series of all time by the Association of American Screenwriters, and it received a full 10 Emmy Awards during its production. But the Seinfeld writers put their foot in their mouth in a major way with one episode. In the episode in question, the main characters, Jerry, Elaine, George, and Kramer, were driving home from a football game. While doing so, they got caught in a traffic jam in the Bronx, which was triggered by a Puerto Rican National Day parade. Out of anger over the traffic jam, Jerry sets a Puerto Rican flag on fire and stomps on it. The four friends also leave the car and make derogatory comments about the conditions in Puerto Rico. After the episode aired, several prominent Puerto Ricans, such as politicians Manuel Mirabal and Fernando Ferrer, publicly spoke out and criticized NBC for airing the politically incorrect episode. Ultimately, the television network apologized for the insensitive actions and statements in the episode, and the writers of the show also came out and stated that they did not mean to make fun of Puerto Rico in the parade. This example shows that the line between humor and mockery can be a very fine one. And that's going to do it for our video on the 7 moments in television that crossed the line. So did we miss anything? What's the worst thing you've seen make it onto the air? Be sure to let us know in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe to Wonderlane, or I'm going to be really upset. So I worked really hard on this, and I just, your support would mean a lot. You want to win a PS5? You win a PS5.